There are moments when your life splits into before and after. For me, it wasn't death or illness. It was betrayal. One evening, I saw the truth in the smallest detail: a careless smile on my husband's face, a trace of perfume that wasn't mine, the way he turned away from me as if I were a stranger. That was the moment the floor gave way beneath me. The man I trusted, the man I had built my life around, had quietly built a different life of his own and left me standing in the ruins of ours. This story is not about how I discovered the betrayal. It is about what I did with it. There is more to come, and if you want to hear the next stories as soon as they are released, subscribe and hit the bell. This is where my story begins. My name is Dakota Williams. I am 35, and almost my entire life has been tied to the pastime of restorer. The word may sound dry, but to me it has always meant more than a profession. I was used to sitting alone at night in my workshop, under the lamp, holding a tiny brush in my hand. I knew how to give life back to what others had already written off as trash. In a worn frame I saw not only the wood, but the hands of the craftsman who once carved it. In a faded fresco I felt the breath of the person who had prayed beneath it 100 years ago. I spoke with the dead through cracks and scars. I always believed this was my mission, to preserve memory. Maybe that's why I fell so quickly for Ethan Carter. He was my opposite, fast, radiant, endlessly confident. Where I slowed time, he rushed forward. His smile could command a room. His voice carried as if the future already belonged to him. If I heard the past, he made others listen to him. We met at a charity event in New York. I was helping a museum restore a series of old portraits and felt out of place among the glittering gowns and ringing voices. I hid by the wall, studying the gilded frames, when I heard someone arguing that technology could not only avoid destroying cities, but actually help them breathe. That voice was his. He caught my glance and walked over. We started talking, and suddenly all the noise around us disappeared. For the first time in a long while, I felt I was being listened to, not out of politeness, but for real. Our meetings soon became regular. He could talk for hours about solar panels, ventilation systems, and projects that would save the world, while I shared stories about paintings and the secrets of all masters. On the surface, we had nothing in common, but it was exactly in that difference that we found balance. His energy complemented my focus, his drive, my patience. 2 years later, we married. The wedding was modest, in a friend's garden outside the city, surrounded by the scent of pine and the glow of candles. No ostentatious luxury, just close people and the feeling that an entire life lay ahead. We moved into my grandmother's apartment, a brick building with large windows overlooking Central Park. For me, it was a temple of memory, old photographs, books, things that breathed history. For him, it was a symbol of status. He loved to stand by the window and say, "From here, Dakota, our new era begins." I smiled and nodded, because I wanted to believe. The first years of marriage seemed like a true idyll. We worked a lot, often argued about what mattered more, preserving the old or building the new. His projects and my restorations were like different pieces of music, but somehow they blended into harmony. In the evenings, our home became a mix of worlds, stacks of his blueprints beside my brushes and solvents. I thought, this is partnership. He pulls forward, I reinforce the foundation. I remember one autumn especially clearly. We walked by the lake in the park, leaves falling onto the water like golden circles. Ethan spoke about his company, Horizon Technologies, as he called it. His eyes were burning. He said it would be the light in the window for the cities of the future. I didn't understand all the technical details, but his passion was contagious. And I believed. It was I who found the place that became the heart of his project. An abandoned shipyard on the Brooklyn waterfront. To me it was the past that should be remembered, rusty cranes, echoing hangars, silence where life once boiled. I dreamed of turning the space into a cultural center, a gallery of light. But Ethan saw something else, the headquarters of his company. Imagine, Dakota, work thriving here again, but this time for the future. His enthusiasm was infectious. I gave in. I told myself I was giving up my dream for ours. In my family there was a relic tied to more than metal and stone. A platinum brooch with a sapphire. On the back, an engraving, the stone endures. My great-grandmother wore it when she left Europe during the war. She endured poverty, separation, humiliation, but kept it and passed it on to her daughter. My grandmother gave it to me on my 18th birthday and said, "This is not jewelry. It is memory. Never give it into the hands of a stranger." I wore it rarely, only on special occasions. But to me it was armor, a reminder that within us there is a strength that can survive anything. A month before the big presentation I felt uneasy. Too many people were in our apartment, contractors, designers, advisors. Everything was in motion, boxes, samples, endless phone calls, chaos. I was afraid the brooch could be lost. I entrusted it to Ethan, asked him to keep it in his office safe. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'll guard it as if it were my life." I believed him, because I wanted to believe, but the changes had already begun. They were invisible, hidden in his tone, in pauses, in his gaze. At the time I didn't yet understand that my home had stopped being a fortress. I lived in the illusion that its walls were solid, while inside the crack was already spreading. Believe it or not, the most dangerous changes don't arrive with thunder and lightning, but with silence. I began to notice how my husband was slowly disappearing from our life, not in steps, but in pauses. First, our conversations disappeared. Those late-night talks when he built cities of the future in his imagination, and I shared stories from my workshop. I suddenly caught myself speaking out loud more to myself than to him. His answers became short, as if every word was a coin he no longer wanted to spend. Then his gestures faded. Once he would brush against my hand in passing, casually, and in that touch there was a sense of belonging. Now he passed me by, and all that lingered in the air was movement, not warmth. His presence became physical, but not emotional. I noticed something else. He guarded the screen of his phone more than anything else. If before he left it lying around, forgotten on the table, now it was always in his hand. I would wake at night to see the dim glow in the darkness. His fingers moved across the screen, and he turned away, as if hiding not text, but himself. When I asked, he answered in the usual way, "Europe doesn't sleep, partners are writing." The words sounded ordinary, but I saw it, tired eyes, nervous movements, shallow breathing. I told myself everything was fine, that it was just work, stress, preparation for the presentation. I repeated it like a spell, but the words brought no relief. One day I came home earlier than usual. The apartment met me with a foreign scent. Not my perfume, not the smell of coffee we always made in the evenings, but something sharp, sweet, alien. Proof hung in the air that someone else had been here besides me. I stood in the hallway for a long time, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But lies, even the ones you tell yourself, never let you rest. I didn't ask him, and that was the scariest part. Not because I feared his answer, but because I feared hearing my own voice. I felt that if I spoke the question out loud, the last wall between us would collapse. I tried to find comfort in my work. On my workbench lay an icon I was restoring for a collector. As I brushed over the cracks, I thought, maybe our marriage is the same on the surface, it can be patched, but the foundation is already destroyed. Deep down I knew no restoration could bring back what's lost, if what's lost is love. We still attended business dinners together. To others, we looked like a strong union, the perfect couple, as guests often said. I smiled, raised my glass, held his hand, but in those moments I felt like part of the decor. He shone, spoke about his project, and his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen when he looked at me in a long time, especially when one of his team members was near too bright, too attentive, too invested. I noticed how he laughed at her jokes, leaned closer, and how in those moments the whole room ceased to exist for him. I sat next to him, and inside I tightened, but I stayed silent. It seemed to me that if I spoke even one word, I would admit defeat, and I wasn't ready to admit it. I wanted to fight even if no one but me saw that the war had already begun. At night, I lay beside him and listened to his breathing. It was steady, calm, like that of a man with nothing to hide. And in my chest there was a weight, as if I were lying on cold stone. I understood. We lived in the same space, but in different worlds. I tried to talk to him. Several times I began carefully, "You've changed. You've grown distant. Maybe we need some time." He answered briefly, "After the presentation, everything will change. It's temporary." But his voice carried no conviction, only fatigue and irritation. And then I began to notice details, small things I once overlooked. His shirt carrying a scent not from our home, but something foreign. His eyes lingering on the phone when I walked past. His smile no longer for me, but so easily given to others. These signs gathered like drops of water that slowly break stone. I began to doubt even the things I once thought unshakable. I remembered my grandmother's words about the brooch, "Never give it to a stranger." And suddenly I realized I had already given more than the brooch to a stranger. I had given him my years, my faith, my strength. And he spent it carelessly, as if all of it could be replaced. Each morning I looked in the mirror and tried to see the woman he once chose. But the reflection more often showed fatigue, shadows under my eyes, lips pressed tight. I was becoming invisible, even to myself. I still held on. I repeated to myself, "It's just work, it's just stress." But deep down I knew it was much more. The warning bells were already ringing loudly, but I pretended not to hear them. I didn't know that soon those bells would turn into a scream. And that scream would bring my world crashing down. Believe it or not, the truth always arrives at the very moment you're least prepared to face it. It doesn't burst in loudly like in the movies. It comes quietly, almost indifferently, and that's where its cruelty lies. I noticed the change is not even in him, but in myself. I began to catch every movement of his, as if I was searching for confirmation of my fears. I felt like an investigator in my own home. If his glance lingered a moment too long, if his tone shifted, if he stayed at work a little later than usual, my chest would tighten with that storm warning feeling, the air still, yet the heart certain lightning was near. His phone became his second skin. He answered messages in the bathroom, in the hallway, turning away when I walked by. Once he would leave it on the couch, forgotten, and I never even thought of picking it up. Now that little screen became a wall between us. I hated its glow in the dark bedroom. I tried convincing myself it was only work. But one night, waking to a faint rustle, I saw him in the living room, the screen's light reflected in his face. His expression was different. Not working, not tired. It was the look of a man who felt warmth and ease but not here. And in that moment I knew he was no longer with me. A few days later I noticed another detail. His shirt carried a scent I didn't know. Not mine, not his usual cologne. It was sweet, heavy, like he was carrying someone else's touch. I didn't ask. The question stuck in my throat because I was terrified of the answer. Soon there was something I couldn't explain away. In his briefcase, tucked between papers, I found an envelope. Inside was a ticket to a modern art exhibition. I knew about the exhibition, we talked about it, and he dismissed it, saying such events were too loud and not for him. But the date matched the very evening he had excused his absence with investor meetings. I stared at the ticket, feeling my heart turn cold. He had not been where he said he was. I didn't make a scene. Outwardly, I stayed the same wife, smiling, asking questions, showing interest in his project. But inside, I was already broken. Every gesture of his became a code I tried to decipher. I thought again of my grandmother's words about the brooch. She always repeated, "It isn't stone or metal. It is our endurance. Our woman survived even when everything collapsed." I would take the brooch from its box, hold it in my hand as if it could give me strength. But now it turned into a symbol of fear, because I had entrusted it to him. And if he could betray me, he could betray what was sacred to me as well. My suspicions grew not only at home. At one of his project presentations, I saw a woman, young, bright-eyed, standing too close. Her laughter was light, ringing. And the most terrifying part, he laughed with her. The kind of laughter I hadn't heard in years. His face came alive, his eyes lit up. He was with her the way he had once been with me. I tried to push the thought away. Is this her? But my heart already knew the answer. After that night, I stopped sleeping peacefully. I sat at the window until dawn, staring at the city lights, asking myself, when did I vanish from his life? At what point did it happen? When did he stop seeing me as a partner, as a woman, as a friend? These questions gnawed at me. I tried to speak with him again. You've changed. I don't feel you beside me. Can you tell me honestly what's happening? He looked at me and said in an even voice, You're dramatizing. Everything is fine. You're tired. You need rest. His words were colder than any confession, because in them there wasn't even the effort to convince me. Only indifference. I felt I was losing not only him, but myself. My work no longer brought joy. I sat over an old canvas and thought, what's the point of restoring someone else's past if I can't save my own present? But the clearest proof came by accident. One evening, walking into his office at the shipyard, I saw a folder on his desk. A photograph peeked out. A woman in a business dress, laughing beside him, and on her neck my brooch. My family's brooch, the one I had trusted him to keep safe. My breath caught. The air seemed to leave the room. I gripped the edge of the desk, staring at that image which shattered not just our marriage, but my faith in him as a man. He hadn't only betrayed me. He had given another woman what for me was the memory of generations. I left without a word. Inside me was everything, rage, grief, despair, but also a strange feeling of release. Because now I knew the truth. Suspicion had turned into knowledge. And that moment marked the beginning of the end. Believe it or not, sometimes destruction doesn't come as a sudden blow, but as long-awaited relief. When I saw the photograph of my family brooch on another woman's neck, I felt not only pain, but also a strange sense of freedom. Suspicion no longer tormented me. It had turned into fact. And facts don't need to be explained or argued, they must be faced. After that came silence. I stopped arguing with myself. I walked through nighttime New York, listened to the roar of cars under the overpasses, saw the glow of strangers' windows, and thought, I am a shadow in my own story. I'm no longer a wife, just an extra in someone else's play. A wave of anger rose in my chest, but I kept it inside. I guarded it like a weapon. The following days felt like rehearsal. I smiled at him over dinner, nodded at his stories about work, but inside I was already building a plan. His world was constructed of lies, and I knew the higher he had climbed, the louder his fall would be. The invitation to the Horizon Technologies presentation came in a golden envelope. The shipyard I had once dreamed of turning into a gallery, he had transformed into the stage for his triumph. He had spent months preparing, gathering investors, politicians, journalists. For him, it was meant to be the pinnacle of his career. For me, it would be the place where the truth came to light. On the day of the presentation, I chose a dark dress, the earrings my grandmother had given me, and pulled my hair back tightly. I wanted to remind myself I am not a victim. But the brooch wasn't on me, it was on her, a one who had taken my place in his heart. The hall was flooded with white light, music thundered, people strolled with champagne glasses, as if it were all theatre. Ethan shone. His speech was polished. He spoke of the future of cities, of the sustainability of eternity. I listened and thought, he talks about eternity while betraying the most eternal thing in my family. And then I saw her, the woman from the photograph. She stood among the journalists, laughing, and on her neck sparkled my brooch. The stone glittered under the spotlights as if mocking me. My heart pounded, but my hands stayed calm. I walked up to her. The room seemed to fall silent, or maybe it was only me, because everything narrowed to one detail, the sapphire at her throat. I spoke quietly, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Where did you get that brooch? Her laughter broke off. She hesitated and stammered. It was a gift. I cut her off. It's a relic of my family. I entrusted it to my husband. Did he give it to you? A murmur ran through the hall. Someone dropped a glass, and the crash echoed under the high ceiling. At that moment, Ethan saw us and hurried over. His face had gone pale. Dakota, this is a misunderstanding, he began, but I didn't let him finish. A misunderstanding? You gave another woman the memory of generations. You gave her part of my blood, and now you call that a misunderstanding? He reached out as if to pull me aside, but I stepped back. Dozens of eyes were on me, investors, partners, journalists. His carefully built world was staring at him through my pain. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not out of joy, but because I knew his empire was collapsing right now, and every witness would remember it. At that moment, a man approached me. Tall, composed, with the face of someone who had endured too long and finally decided to speak. He held out his hand, Daniel Clark. I understood immediately who he was. The husband of the woman wearing my brooch. His voice was calm, which made it all the more firm. The hall instantly hushed, every head turned toward him. He destroyed my family, Daniel said, looking straight at Ethan. And that wasn't enough. He also stole my money, the funds from our trust, the ones I had entrusted to him. He siphoned them off and poured them into this project. Everything he brags about today is built on theft and betrayal. Exclamations rippled through the hall. Cameras clicked, capturing every detail. People exchanged looks. Another glass shattered on the floor. Daniel spoke without shouting, but his composure made his words undeniable. In his voice was not only the hurt of a husband, but the cold fury of a partner betrayed. I watched him and realized he was saying aloud what we both felt. My betrayal and his loss combined into a single verdict. His words were the stone that finally shattered the wall Ethan had built from lies. My husband turned pale. His lips moved, but no words came. He tried to speak, but every glance and every camera flash reminded him it was over. His empire was collapsing not only from my strike, but from Daniel's accusation as well. The noise in the hall grew louder. Investors exchanged looks. Journalists recorded every second. Ethan tried to shout over the crowd, but his words drowned in the rising tide. I stood still, watching as cracks spread across this carefully constructed façade. In my heart there was no triumph, only cold certainty. Everything he had hidden was now exposed. He looked at me with pleading eyes. But I only said, "You destroyed what we built yourself, and now watch as your house falls apart in front of everyone." Believe it or not, that evening I realized revenge brings no relief. It's like medicine that dulls sharp pain, but doesn't heal the wound. Yes, I had shattered his world. Yes, I had shown everyone the truth. But when the lights went out and the crowd dispersed, only silence remained. And in that silence, I didn't hear triumph. I heard my own heart, tired but still alive. I stood at the window looking at the city lights. New York roared as always, indifferent to anyone's tragedy. And suddenly I felt a strange calm. If the world goes on living, then so must I. The pain was still inside me, but it was no longer the center. It had become the backdrop against which something new could take shape. I remembered my grandmother's words about the brooch, "The stone endures." I used to think she meant the sapphire, but now I understood she meant me. It isn't the stone that keeps the woman, but the woman who keeps the stone. And if the brooch had survived 3 generations, then I could survive my own life. I thought of all I had lost. Family, trust, years, faith. But with that I had gained honesty with myself. I no longer lived in illusion. And that was liberation. Sometimes destruction is necessary to see what is solid. I decided I would not let this story make me a prisoner. Revenge had been a step, but not the goal. The goal would be creation. I would invest myself in what had meaning, in my work, in memory, in the people who needed support. My energy would never again be wasted on those who betray. And if one day someone asked me what I took from all this, I would answer simply, betrayal breaks, but it doesn't kill. It teaches you to see clearly. It burns away lies and leaves only what is truly worth keeping. I did not give up on life. I stayed. I moved forward. That's the end of today's story. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them in the comments below. I truly enjoy reading what you have to say. If you'd like more, check out the full playlist linked in the description of this video. New real stories are on the way, and I'd love to share them with you. Hopefully, I'll see you next time. If this journey resonated with you, please hit subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss the latest stories. Thank you for listening, and remember, even the hardest drama stories can end with freedom and dignity.